Welcome to the grand finale of One Book, One Aurora 2022, a visit with the author of Swimming Back to Trout River, Linda Rui Feng. My name is Risha Mandelkorn, and I have the pleasure of hosting this afternoon's event. Before we begin, I would like to offer a land acknowledgement. We are all immigrants and children of immigrants to Canada. We gratefully acknowledge the original caretakers of this land. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and as we share this space, acknowledging Indigenous nations reminds us of our important connection to this land. I am speaking from the Dish with One Spoon Wampum, a covenant between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that calls upon all of us to take no more than we need, to coexist in peace with other nations, and to ensure the continuing sustainability of the land, air, and water. In that spirit, we honor all who came before us, our own ancestors, as well as the Indigenous caretakers, named and unnamed, recorded and unrecorded. A few tech details to get us started this afternoon. Zoom has two options for viewing found at the top right corner of your screen, and you can select either the gallery or speaker view. You may also enable closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. We are recording this event as part of Aurora Public Library's archive of author events. Linda Rui Feng is a writer and a scholar, a practitioner and researcher of imaginative storytelling. Born in Shanghai, Linda has lived in San Francisco, New York, and Toronto. She is a graduate of Harvard and Columbia Universities and is currently a professor of Chinese cultural history at the University of Toronto. Her prose and poetry have appeared in journals such as Fiddlehead, the Kenyon Review, Santa Monica Review, and Washington Square Review. Her debut novel, Swimming Back to Trout River, was longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Linda Rui Feng to our virtual space. Welcome, Linda.
Hi, Risha. Thank you for having me here, and it's wonderful to join this wonderful program.
Well, thank you so much for being our selected author for the year. We've had just a wonderful journey with your book that inspired so many activities, and it's an honor to have you here with us today. I'm going to start with a few opening questions, if I might, to get the conversation started. And our guests, I invite you to submit your questions for Linda in the Q&A as we go along, and we'll get to as many as possible within our time allotment. So Linda, if I can ask you first, as a scholar and as an educator of Chinese cultural history, how did you balance the fictional narrative within the historical context? And was there a methodology that you had for marrying the two of them?
Thank you for that wonderful question. And it's a big and complicated question. I'll just start by saying that the material and the kind of the inklings for the story or the desire to write a story like this probably predated my training as a historian, a cultural historian, and as an academic, certainly. And so I can say that when I'm writing fiction, I don't think of myself as an academic. I have a very different goal in mind than I do when I am in the classroom or when I'm giving an academic talk or otherwise functioning as in an academic environment. And the big difference is that as a fiction writer, I kind of come to my material when I come to my desk writing, I have to first let go of many trappings of my education, in a sense. I come to it kind of peeling off the layers, as many layers as possible, to get to something very, very much more essential in the storytelling process. The other difference is that as an academic and trained to read texts from the past, we often we ask different questions, but as a storyteller, the questions that I most often ask is, rather than what happened or what did happen, is what if this and this happened? or what if something different were to happen to this and this person? So it's much more of a subjunctive mood, the kind of sometimes the counterfactual, or the sort of winnowing out different possibilities, rather than recording what happened exactly. And it is a much more, I guess it's, for lack of a better word, it's a much more open process. So I think of my authority as a storyteller being rooted more in the imagination than in my authority as a researcher and as an academic. And of course, all of our skills are called upon to do everything we do. So there is certainly overlap in these two roles, but there's also a great deal that isn't, historical and academic in what I do. So.
Thank you. I found the character Junie, who was born with truncated legs, so interesting. And your use of the concept of rootedness when she says to her grandfather, your legs grew roots like those trees by the river, and asks if her legs will grow roots when she is older. And although it won't happen in the physical sense, metaphorically, her roots are central to the theme of the full narrative. Can you speak to your creation of the character of Junie?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Junie and Momo, I would say, are the two characters that probably came to me in some form, vague inklings, the earliest in the process. And of course, it's not a neat process, so it's not like sequential, but Junie is definitely one of the first characters to materialize, I would say, on the page and in my mind. And I think of her as, I guess, as a writer, I think about the idea of childhood a lot. Not my childhood in particular, but kind of childhood in general. And I think about, so in some ways, she is the kind of like the embodiment of everything that is powerful about childhood, by which I mean, childhood is a very, very special time in our lives when our wishes and desires and our fantasies and longings are almost out of proportion with our agency and our power. And this is true whether you're 6 months old or 12 years old. And I see that as a theme that's extremely fertile for the imagination and for writing. And so, a lot of the I guess, the child faces the problem of not always having a say in where they live, how they are able to express themselves. And I wanted Junie to kind of embody that powerlessness and at the same time embody all the resources and spirit and vigor of overcoming that powerlessness that is essential to childhood. But in her case, she has other forms of powerlessness that are very particular to her story and to her family and to herself and to her body. So, she to me is the result of thinking about what if, about childhood. What if a child claims her roots in a way that is not often possible, articulating in a way that is perhaps precocious for her age, but nonetheless a very childlike, simple desire to say, I want to live here, where my family has grown, my father has grown up, and my grandparents has this world built around her. What if she holds to that and calls out the powerlessness of childhood and tries to do something with it? And I also think I like the idea of a child who's, another property of childhood is that we often, as we grow, we see that our bodies betray ourselves in many ways. And what if we have a child who sees her body as an ally rather than a betrayer, and does something very imaginative with it, and calls into question, this idea of wholeness, normality, or whatever you want to call it, and kind of transforms her world in a way by her insistence on those solutions to childhood, as it were. So yeah, she's definitely very dear and near to my heart. I'll also mention that I had her born on February 29th, which is kind of like a singular birthday. I wanted to give her a very special birthday. And at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a February 29th. And, the world was not a happy place then, but I got her a cupcake and a birthday candle just to celebrate her birthday at a time when the world felt like it was falling apart. So it made me happy. So.
Oh, that is such a beautiful story. Thank you so very much for sharing that with us. So Linda, music is woven throughout the narrative and has been a central programming theme for our One Book, One Aurora project. Would you speak to your relationship with music and how it became so central to the story?
Yeah, absolutely. And, even though I did not attend the concert that you were mentioning earlier, I'm so happy to see all these events that has been part of the program. And so for me, I think a lot of readers have been surprised to find that I'm not a musician, and so here I can confess that I'm not a musician. My relationship to music is very much that of an outsider, and or if you want to call it amateur. But I don't think of that as a necessarily a shortcoming for a novelist, for a writer, because being outside of music, meaning I'm not an active performer. I have very limited experience with playing the violin, although I did play it for a couple of years in my high school years, which was a long time ago. And so, but being an outsider and being a keen observer of performances and the power of music in the audience as a member of the audience gives me this incredible kind of persistent drive to get close to it. And it never really goes away because I know that I will never be able to be at the center of, for example, be a composer, be a concert violinist on stage performing. But then it also allows me to ask endless questions about what music is for, how music continues to affect us at different parts of our lives, how our perceptions of music change as we get older, and just what does it mean to create with music and with sound. And, of course, as someone whose work, bread and butter, is language and letters on a page, I also have tremendous just awe and respect and envy for musicians who's able to draw people in, at a park, on the street, and not just in the concert hall. And I constantly think about my own craft in relationship to that kind of power. And it gives me something to strive for, to have that kind of engagement with my readers. So that's a long-winded way of saying I'm an outsider, I'm an amateur, but it is something that sort of serves as a beacon for me to always work toward and to ask those subjunctive questions of what if, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, thank you. Swimming Back to Trout River reads rich with what seems to be personal anecdotes. Did you incorporate oral storytelling into your work, or was this all a product of your imagination?
So I'm assuming oral storytelling, you mean like, did I incorporate people actually telling me these anecdotes? Um, well, yes and no. They're transformed versions of oral anecdotes. And maybe I'll just step back a little bit and say that, I grew up in an extended family of just natural storytellers. And I grew up hearing, my aunts and uncle and very and cousins, like of all from both sides of my family, telling stories big and small about just constantly. And I think probably that was how I learned to experience time at a very early stage in life, through gradually, and we start with our very limited own history, and we start to kind of grope toward a time before our lifetime, and then maybe a generation before that, and then maybe a century before that. And so these early story, like being exposed to storytellers, natural storytellers in my family, was part of that step toward going outside of my own time scale, which was very limited as a child, and gradually think beyond my own experiences, my own age, my own familiar situation. And so that is very important to me. But back to your question about incorporating that, I wanted to incorporate the idea, sort of the excitement of telling storytelling. But a lot of the stories are, of course, fictional. I would say most of them are fictional, but I wanted to capture that energy of sitting across from someone, and having them tell you a very poignant moment in their youth or in their adulthood, and feeling just kind of really drawn into an entirely different life. And I would say that's one of the like most satisfying aspects of being a novelist, is to be steeped in that kind of world, that you actively cultivate and polish and perfect, day in and day out. So
Thank you. So Linda, one of my very favorite, although they were all favorite, but one of my very favorite chapters in the novel is the improviser's guide to untranslatable words. And I love that chapter for its poetry and because it so perfectly expresses the challenges of translating culture and language and even music in ways that diverse audiences can find commonality. Would you speak about that chapter a bit, please?
yeah, absolutely. And it's one of my favorite too. And so this idea of untranslatable words is something that I've always been very fascinated with, because I immigrated to North America in my early teens. I had a period when I felt, being new to English, I felt bereft of both language, like spoken language, and also literacy. And of course, it was a temporary, and now looking back, it was a relatively short amount of time, but it did have an imprint on me. This feeling of being, linguistically at sea. On one hand, it's incredibly, in some ways, it's kind of devastating because you're bereft of for me, one of the most important forms of expression. But at the same time, it is also strangely freeing, because I think about the times when I laugh the hardest have always been when I've tried to communicate something and something goes wrong in communication in those days. And suddenly it's hilarious. And and so I think about when I was writing the novel, I think about those very formative moments in my life, like its sort of its fraughtness, and also its humor, incredible humor, and it's being sort of a pivotal time in a life, mine, but also in other people's lives, I'd imagine. And I think of it also as being very fertile with narrative and with moments of that are worth taking apart and examining. And so the guide to untranslatable words is a way to let Kasia, the character, experience that really fraught time as someone who is not able to be fluent in her new language, in her new country, but at the same time, for it to be a opportunity of metamorphosis in this incredibly also renewing kind of way, because not having the words, not having the right words or the immediate words actually offers her an opportunity to remember and to think and to recreate and to construct a kind of like a new self. So, and also I have been informally accumulating words that are very difficult to explain to people, and I kind of relish this opportunity to kind of go on and on about these terms that I would like to, I sometimes go on and on to my friends about. And so that's kind of the genesis of the chapter.
Linda, would you gift us by reading an excerpt from Swimming Back to Trout River so we can enjoy listening to the author's voice?
Absolutely. Thank you for that opportunity. So since we're talking about that, the improviser's guide, I'll read the first few paragraphs from that section. So this is the chapter, The Improviser's Guide to Untranslatable Words. 1. 缘分, noun. A condition two people are said to have between them if they are brought together in ways large or small, for a few minutes or for decades. Lovers, of course, can be explained this way, but more often, 缘分 is invoked to explain a stranger who brings a lost wallet to your door and ends up becoming your cousin's business partner, or an orphan child who grows up to have the same chin as his adopted father. Kasia could say she and Cyrus had 缘分, for example. 缘分 acknowledges some unknowability in the workings of the universe and implies there's an invisible mesh that loosely bound people and circumstances. It doesn't resort to the heavy-handedness of the English term fate, which is hardly equivalent. No deity of any kind operates any mechanism to deploy 缘分. No looms, no spools, no thunderbolt. It exists more like ambient weather, and like weather, it may come and go and even disappear altogether on a whim. Sometimes people who want to permanently take leave of each other will say that their 缘分 has exhausted itself. But most important of all, 缘分 presents itself in ways beyond human reckoning. To properly explain this, Kasia will have to begin with Junie's birth date, then go back 18 years. So I think this is a probably good spot to stop.
Well, thank you, Linda. And you know what? We're going to start with our audience Q&A, and have a question coming in that I'll put to you and everybody, our guests today. Please feel free to type in your question in the Q&A, and I'll read it out to Linda. So, Linda, from one of our guests today, thank you for coming today, Ms. Feng. What beautiful prose and what a wonderfully crafted story. Question: do you know how the story will end when you begin writing, or does it arrive as you write?
Yeah, that's a terrific question, and I think for every writer this will be different, and perhaps for the same writer it will be different for every book. There's the novelist Tobias Wolff had said at some point, which I love this quote. He says, "There's no right way to tell a story, only the right way to tell a particular story." So in my case, there was a lot of improvisation on this in this process. I would say that when I started writing, I mostly just have inklings of characters and voices and things that they are drawn to or feel very strongly about at the beginning. And it was probably maybe 2 years into the writing process itself that I finally came to knowing how it will end. And so probably by the end of the first draft, I knew how the story would end. And then from that point on, the end didn't change, but everything else changed with subsequent revisions, including the vast amounts of the middle part. and by the end of the process, editorial process, a little bit of the beginning also changed. So yeah, that's the long answer. I didn't know how it would end when I started.
Thank you. While we wait for other questions to come from our audience, I have another one if I might ask you. You have incorporated a symphony of senses in your writing, so we can hear, smell, see, feel, and touch the elements in the narrative, and it really brings it to life. Was this a deliberate writing process, or is this how you experience the world?
Yeah, and this makes me think about the fact that I really love the workshop that the program had offered as the sort of the sensory approach to writing. I wish I could take that workshop actually. Um, um, I think I do experience the world that way, but most of it is because it comes from envy of other people with different jobs. So, as a writer, I mostly sit in front of the computer or, piece of paper or something, and I mostly live in my head. I spend a lot of time in my head. And so I'm tremendously envious of people who create out in the world, uh, engaged with the senses. I'm terribly envious of dancers who speak so powerfully through their gestures and their bodies, or chefs who tell us who they, where they come from and their stories of their childhood with their meals and the kind of the flavors that they create. And so I spend a lot of time wishing that I were able to have those jobs. And probably that kind of envy seeps into my writing because I do care a lot about how our senses take us back to the past, how we understand our world through obviously hearing with music, but also smell. And one of the very, not terribly pivotal scene in the novel involves a dead whale, and the kind of putrid smell that comes from the whale. And when I wrote this, I hadn't thought too much about really scent and smell, but since I had, since that draft of the novel sort of came out on the page, I've started to think more about the history of smell and scent and the importance of all of that in our lives. And just last year, actually, I was fortunate to be part of I was given a research fellowship to do some research on the history of scent, and I had a tremendous, wonderful time. So all of this is to say, yes, the senses are incredibly important to me, and they're goals for me, and especially from the perspective of using language to describe them. They're wonderful challenges to, for example, to capture scent with words. And it's something that I really, really love to do.
We have a very kind comment from one of our guests thanking us for bringing forth this interesting event. And to you, this was an incredible first book. Are you already writing another novel?
Well, thank you for that. I'm a very slow writer. So the answer is yes, I am working on a new book. Um, and I don't know how long it will take me. um, but I'm thinking, um, I'm still thinking about um, immigration as a theme. But I'm also thinking about writing more sort of younger characters. I have so far three millennial characters, and it's still partly set in San Francisco, so I don't know if that will change. But so yes, I am working on something, and I'm continuing to find that my fascination for music and other arts constantly still seeps in and kind of drives what I do next. So,
Thank you. Another guest says, thank you for your excellent novel. From your novel, whether we can conclude that wherever you go as an immigrant, your final destination is to return to the origin.
okay, so so whether that's a conclusion, is that I'm guessing, is that how I'm reading the question?
I think that our guest is asking whether we can include that wherever you go,
Okay.
your final destination is to return to the origin.
Um, I guess the trout metaphor is there, certainly. And Junie, as the embodiment of that longing, is there. I think that immigration does change us. And so, when one does return to the origin, it's both the returnee and the origin do change. And so it's the short answer would be yes, but the long answer would be that it's more complicated. And but I want to write a book that leads people to ask questions rather than give one answer, and I don't have any answers really to give, but and so I think that's a nice way to think about what immigration is, or even aging is. I think even if we don't go anywhere and we revisit our childhood, we often have very mixed feelings about returning, or what it means to return, and whether there's such a thing as an origin at all. Yeah, that's a
Thank
great
you.
question. Thank you.
The next question actually is from a writer, and she writes, such a beautiful novel. When you are editing or writing, can you share how you decide whether to share information in expository, dialogue, or interior monologue?
Wow, that's a $1 million question.
Mm.
And of course, that's a wonderful question, because those decisions are very important decisions, and they're decisions that I think a writer makes a million times a day, at the level of a sentence. I would say, not just as at the level of a chapter. Um, I don't have a system. Um, I tend to, because this was my first book, I tend to only kind of retrospectively make sense of what I have done, and so it's probably not the most accurate. Um, but I tend to try to hear it, or read it through, and there is a sense, I think, expository dialogue or interior monologue each have a very different rhythm to them. Or maybe it's not so much, it's both rhythm and a kind of tonality, a color, if I can use sort of mixed metaphors all over the place. And the only way to really decide whether you've done the right thing or not is to have a very rough draft and read it through. And sometimes reading it aloud to oneself is tremendously helpful. And I find that often in the process of reading, rereading, and reading aloud, I I would start to think, ooh, that was too much exposition, because it's really slowing things down. or that dialogue doesn't, that was unnecessary, and I end up cutting and reshaping it. So it's kind of like a minute by minute A versus B iterative process rather than any kind of systematic formula that I can attest to. But what a wonderful question.
It's a writer's question.
Yeah.
And
If
speaking of,
any, go ahead.
no, sorry, Linda. If any,
if anyone knows the answer, a better answer, I would love to hear it. Yeah, I still struggle with it every day. So
the next question is also from a writer. And although I generally don't call out names, I'm going to say that this is from Marnie McGuire. I'm so delighted she's with us today because she is the author who conducted our writing workshop based upon your novel that you would like to attend.
I still do.
And Marnie says, thank you so much for speaking to us. Swimming Back to Trout River inspired so many engaging events this year. I will add, hers was one of them. We loved it. She asked if you're working on a second novel. You've already said that you were, and she's wondering if you could tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, so it's still very much in the early stages. So the things I say are as amorphous as they are on the page. But I'm interested in sort of an intergenerational relationship between three millennials and a woman who was their caretaker, and a kind of a younger generation trying to understand an older woman with a very different life history, and who they really only came to know in a very limited sense. So I'm still thinking about the understanding kind of understanding immigration, understanding what happens when someone's life changes in the middle in a very drastic way. I'm interested in looking at through younger people's perspective on it, and so I'm still thinking about the how, who, and why of this picture. But thank you, Marnie, for the workshop and for that question.
Our next question, this is very interesting. Hi, Linda. I have not read your book yet. I just got to know there is this event. I am at the Aurora Public Library joining the Zoom now. Welcome. I have two questions. One, do you write the book in English? Is there a Chinese version? Two, what is your message you want to convey to your audience of both the Chinese and the West? Is there a difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I wrote it in English. It was intended as an English version. I don't know that there is a Chinese version, not to my knowledge. It has not been translated. And I again, so the short answer is that it was an English version. And what is the message I want to convey to the audience of both languages? I think when I wrote it, I imagined my audience to be partly like the people that I grew up with, my closest, some of my closest friends growing up are, people like me. They're bilingual, bicultural, and I guess when I wrote it in English, I had them in mind, but obviously I chose English. I don't know that I have a single message for either audiences. I hope that if the reader, and I want this book to be more universal than my friends, even though when I was writing it, I was thinking about them. I would like the reader to, I would like this book to have universal connection with readers, whether they read Chinese or not. And that the ideal scenario is one in which someone who is from a very different linguistic or cultural background could read it and find echoes of their childhood, of their life, of their parents, of their friends, their children in this book. That would be, that's always my dream. And if they have similar experiences as the characters in the novel, I hope that they will use it to reflect on their experiences, whether they're happy or painful, and find solace in some coherence in that past, in their own past. And so I guess I didn't imagine a difference. I didn't imagine an audience that was necessarily categorized by language or background, for any kind of background for that matter. But obviously, people who have different backgrounds and languages will respond to the book very differently. And I think that's also a wonderful thing about having a book out in the world, is that it's no longer me that's speaking to people. It's the book itself. So.
And I think that answer actually speaks to the next question, which I'll read out to you, about speaking to you and to a person and their own experiences. Our next guest says, Linda, thank you for the beautiful writing. Do you feel you told the story you wanted to tell about people and history through this book? Being an immigrant from China, I can relate to many details in your book referencing many big events in the 60s to 80s. Do you want to speak to an individual's experience? Because this is what you're talking about now.
Right.
Any immigrant will come to it from their point, and it's lovely to hear that it resonated with someone from her immigrant experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I do believe that there is no single immigrant story. There's no single cultural revolution story, and that what I could do as a writer, as a fiction writer, is to tell a story set in those times, and to bring to light 4 characters out of millions who are perhaps more ordinary and have lives that are that play out in those particular trajectories. So my goal is not to represent as many, or the sort of the immigrant experience, but just to delve deeply into particulars. And if they work, if they resonate with readers, I'm very grateful for that. I'm always, I get emails from people who tell me about various ways that they do connect with the story, and they always surprise me. And I think that's a great thing, because had I planned for the book to work in those ways, I don't know, I wouldn't have been able to do anything. So yes, I'm grateful for connections that readers have with it, and whether as insider or outsider to the Chinese immigrant experience. So thank you for that question.
The next question is, do you have any spiritual practices which help you to intuit your way through your writing?
Oh, wow, that's a wonderful question. I've never been asked that question before, and I love it. The spiritual practices, if I could kind of guess what this audience member is thinking, maybe rituals, or maybe kind of practices that kind of help through the difficulties of writing. So I will say that for me, the best and worst part of writing fiction is that it is you're constantly trying to make a bridge across a void. You're trying to forge a path out of almost nothingness. That sounds bleak. It's not always bleak, but it's a lot of uncertainty, in contrast to, say, for example, academic writing, in which there is uncertainty. There's a lot to work on, and there's a lot of challenges, but there are certain kind of methods and protocols that one can use to get to a writing a book or an article or something like that. And so most what this audience member is calling spiritual practice is really a way for me to talk to myself out of the sort of primal fear of the unknown that is very much part of the everyday writing process. And of course, there are days when writing, are very few and far in between, but there are days when writing is going well and I don't need it. But more often, I do kind of have to do a lot of self coaching and self talk. And the way I do it is I try to have conversations with my characters, and I try to talk through them as directly as I can. And on days when I'm stuck, I sort of I hold interviews with them, and I kind of try to coax out of them certain emotional confessions. And as crazy as that might sound, that dialogue is what when I'm stuck has the potential of bringing me out of that stuckness. And so that's the kind of spiritual practice, by which I mean it's a sort of imagined fantastical relationship that I have with figments of my own imagination, but it does help. So.
Our next guest writes, the novel contains many incidences of trauma in the characters' lives. Did you get much feedback about the ending of the novel from readers? Did you want your readers to decide if it's a hopeful ending? That is, what's in store for Junie and Dawn?
Yeah, well, that's a great question too. So the short answer about the feedback of the ending of the novel is that no, I did not get feedback from readers. I got feedback about other parts of the novel, or I should say I did get feedback, but I didn't change it. And I know that different readers will feel very differently about the ending, and I think that is the beauty of fiction, is that I want the end to leave a door or a window open for people, and I want the readers to decide for themselves where that door or window leads to. And I feel that it's not my place to tell them what that is. And it's my job to take them to that door and window, and to the best of my ability, and kind of let them go. What is in store for Junie and Dawn? I think that was the follow-up question. I, the honest answer is that I don't know. So as for me, I took myself to that door. I wrote it. It felt complete and true in some ways. And I haven't thought about it beyond that. And I'm open to, when inspiration comes to me and I think about Dawn and Junie, I'm open to what they are going to tell me about their subsequent lives. But as of now, I don't have a definitive answer as now. So I'm not trying to be coy in my answer. The honest answer is I don't know. But I love to hear what readers how each reader might answer that question differently. And it's a privilege to get that from readers. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Well, I'm getting in the Q&A at this point, we've pretty much come to the end of our questions, but I'm getting lots of comments thanking you for your writing advice. One of our guests has been carrying her late mother's journal with her for a long time, and she would like to start writing stories rooted in her own history. And the person who asked you about whether you intuit as part of your practice, thought that talking to your characters was a beautiful aspect of meditation. So there is some feedback from from at least the writing community in Aurora and beyond. So thank you for doing the Q&A with us. You never know what our guests are going to ask, and it's always amazing to see somebody being able to roll with the answers when it's coming out of who knows which field. So thank you so much for this, Linda.
Well, thank you for all the questions, and for yeah, it's a privilege to know about the world that sort of kind of springs up, the life that springs up around the characters when it's out of my hands, when the book is out of my hands. And I think that's one of the most amazing things I've come to discover as a first-time novelist, is that the characters go on to have adventures in the hands of readers that I don't imagine, I could not possibly imagine myself. And that's a richness that I had not anticipated, and I'm very grateful for that. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, today's event was a culmination of our One Book, One Aurora community initiative. And as a tradition, we hold 2 contests each year, writing and photography, based on themes presented in the novel. So for our writing contest, it was Swimming Back to Trout River is a moving story of a Chinese family navigating change in turbulent times. Families provide an endless source of material. For the writing contest, the theme was Stories of Family, Real or Imagined. Second place was awarded to Corey Haldane for A Mother's Love. First place was awarded to Rachel Stone for Summer Queen. And you can read the winning entries in the winter online edition of Borealis, which is APL's print and digital magazine. The photography contest. Music and its riveting power connects the characters in the novel through space and time. We invited images that captured the power of music and performance. We received entries in 2 categories, youth and adult. In the youth category, second place was awarded to Kaylin Panhusen, and first place was awarded to Lakai Asal. In the adult category, second place was awarded to Greg King, and first place was awarded to Brenda Snape. The winning photographs will appear in the Aurora newspaper and in the winter online edition of Borealis. Congratulations to the winners, and thank you to all who participated. As we come to the end of our One Book, One Aurora 2022, I'd like to thank the Aurora newspaper and especially Brock Weir for being our media sponsor and for their ongoing support of art and culture in our community. Marnie McGuire for sparking creativity in our writing workshop, A Symphony with the Senses. Yifang Shi for her photography exhibit, Women's Voices, Censorship and Resistance. The York Chamber Ensemble under the direction of Michael Barrett for the transformative performance of the Butterfly Lovers Concerto. The Tian Su Art Group for introducing us to the art of Chinese dance. Academic, journalist, and writer Jan Wong, who spoke about her experiences in Maoist China and her work as a foreign correspondent in the late 80s and early 90s. And thank you to our wonderful community of readers and book clubs who read and discussed Swimming Back to Trout River and were so kind to send us emails expressing how much they enjoyed your book, Linda. A very special thank you to Lucy Frechette, Marketing and Communication at Aurora Public Library, for her beautiful sense of design that made this project truly come alive, and for being tech support at every event. And most especially, thank you, Linda, for your beautiful novel, Swimming Back to Trout River. Everybody, read it if you haven't read it yet. And thank you all for spending part of your afternoon with us. Stay safe and get ready for One Book, One Aurora 2023.